This is
you
Linda.
got it. It's also Diana Myers.
Hi, Diana.
Hi.
Who else?
This is Toki from Penrose.
Okay. How are you, Toki?
Good. How are you?
And this is Diana Ames from Erie.
And I am Chris Lacey from Inglis Housing Corp.
Great. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
Yeah?
Linda Thompson from the McKean County Redevelopment and Housing Authority.
Hey, Linda.
Hey, how are ya?
Good, and you?
Good.
Nancy Morrill with the Bucks County Women's Advocacy Coalition.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi.
A lot of friends on. All right. Anyone else? Well, we always get a good crowd when it's budget time. It seems like it's always budget time in Pennsylvania. I think we're acknowledging the supremacy of the federal government. Let's start with Ehren Dohler from the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, a frequent guest because you always do such a great job at explaining what the heck is going on in Washington, Ehren. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and then we'll spend the second half of the call on space budget. Ehren?
Thanks, Cindy. Hi, everyone. So as you probably heard, the president released his final budget yesterday. There were a lot of exciting things in it for housing. So I'm going to hit the highlights. I can maybe answer questions about, more into details, but it's a big budget, so I may not have dug into your specific question, but I'll give it a shot. So the big news on the housing front that you may have heard is that the budget proposes $11 billion, that's billion with a B, over 10 years in assistance for homeless families with kids. They say that this is, the right amount to meet the goal of ending family homelessness by 2020. The details are still a little sketchy, but about 80% of that funding would go toward housing choice vouchers administered through PHAs, and then 20% would go towards rapid rehousing administered through the COCs, and there's some language generally about partnerships between those two in administering this whole proposal. So that's a really big number, and very exciting that the president has sort of put out a proposal. This is what we need. They think we need to do to end family homelessness. The other notable thing about it is that it is proposed on the mandatory side of the budget. Now, that doesn't turn housing choice vouchers or rapid rehousing into an entitlement. That would take, them saying as much. All that it does is that, you can get a one-time appropriation that's mandatory instead of a discretionary, just like anything else. So, but what it means is that it wouldn't be subject to this sort of yearly appropriations process, that all the money would be authorized up front. So that's exciting in one way. The housing programs in general are sort of beholden to this yearly budget process, which makes it hard to be flexible with money and always puts things at risk. But it also, frankly, means that this was the Obama and HUD's way of getting around the current budget caps. If they had proposed $11 billion in discretionary spending, it would have gone above the discretionary budget caps that they had just spent so much political capital renegotiating with Congress at the end of last year, if you remember that. So this is their way of putting in a proposal that's outside of those budget caps and not having to renegotiate those budget caps to get something like this through. So that's a big, exciting proposal, as you probably suspect, at least in the short run, that there's not much chance of this Congress passing something like that. But I think it's really important in putting a marker down on what, besides large increases in HUD-VASH and more nominal, moderate increases in McKinney-Vento homeless assistance to end chronic homelessness, there really hasn't been new rental assistance funding in any large size created since the early 2000s. So the idea of the Obama administration putting forth $11 billion in new rental assistance is really, I think, important in putting a marker down on how important rental assistance is and how families are struggling, and we need more of it. So I think that although this is, it's always easy to dismiss a budget proposal like this as dead on arrival, I think it's extremely important in sort of building the argument overall for more rental assistance long term. So that's the big news, big proposal. Since I'm on it, the President's budget proposed also a more modest proposal on the discretionary side for housing choice vouchers, Section 8 vouchers, that in many ways mirrors, but in a more modest way, the large mandatory proposal. So the budget proposes about 10,000 new vouchers for homeless families with kids on the discretionary side. That sort of seems sized that it might be possible to get this year. So still some new vouchers for homeless families with kids on the discretionary side of the budget for in housing choice vouchers. They also did within the voucher account. They also increased admin fees quite significantly, which is exciting. Because as anyone who that runs a PHA or has talked to PHAs, that's been something that's been very low for a long time and makes it extremely difficult to administer the program. So that's good news on that front. And also, finally, within the voucher program, they propose $15 million to do what they're calling a mobility pilot. Pretty much what that is that it would be additional funding for, I think, 10 PHAs around the country or possibly communities around the country that would put in a demonstration project to help families with vouchers either move to higher opportunity neighborhoods or stay in those neighborhoods. And so it would, have, say, mobility counseling assistance, housing search assistance, possibly some other things. So I think that's exciting and could help sort of build the case on how PHAs can help families move into higher opportunity neighborhoods, and also can build the case of sort of how much money that would really need to scale. So some exciting things on the voucher in the housing choice voucher account.
Can I ask a question now, or should I wait till you're done?
No, sure.
Oh, okay. So, the PHAs in Pennsylvania have not been great friends to the homeless. And so this could be a tremendous opportunity. Do you have any sense of whether they would have to apply for this, or whether it would be more like VASH and it would be assigned to various PHAs? Do you have any thoughts or any information on how that would be, the money would be allocated?
By the way, Chester County takes exception to that statement.
So's McKean.
Okay. Well, let me just say that's why you two are on this phone call. Thank you for your efforts.
Okay.
They should be acknowledged and appreciated, please.
Yes, I think across the country there are some really great PHAs working really hard to end homelessness in their communities, but HUD did a study on all PHAs in the efforts to end homelessness, and there's certainly progress to be made there. So the 10,000 vouchers on the discretionary side have a lot more detail to them than the mandatory side. So I don't know much about how that big proposal might get allocated. But on the discretionary side, it seems to be that it would be distributed via competition, and it seems that there'd be some sort of point system or some sort of ranking. That's really unclear, but there's language that they would take into account geographic need. So using, their data on need per area, but then also take into account things like capacity to serve or experience serving, people experiencing homelessness, partnerships with COCs, that sort of thing. And so I think it would be a competition. I think that it would both reward PHAs that are currently working with their COCs to end homelessness, which I think would be, as a first step, would sort of hopefully help those that are not doing that see that there could be some good money coming their way to do this, and though possibly also that competition process. Once a NOFA comes out that has these criteria, maybe, that would also bring more PHAs to the table. So it does seem that they're trying to incentivize that with this money. But that's all a good amount of conjecture based on a little bit of limited budget language. So maybe we'll learn more this year. Of course, we'll only really learn more if these vouchers are funded by Congress, which is the next step.
But I think the increase in admin fees would be very helpful.
Yes, certainly. I think that's really tied. That we can talk about the president's proposal is putting the money in the admin fee account that would make this much more possible for PHAs to administer, since the experience with HUD-VASH has shown that it takes a little more resources to help more vulnerable people. So yes, I think that's important.
Okay, so other items. Have you taken a look at public housing funds from CDBG?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just sort of run down the list then quickly. Section 8 PBRA, has a nominal increase to keep up with costs, renew all contracts. Public Housing Capital actually proposed pretty much a small decrease in public housing. Well, flat funding really. They proposed a small decrease that paid for an increase in Jobs Plus, and so flat funding compared to 2016 overall. Public housing operating got a small increase of $69 million. So let's see, home is flat funded at the 2016 level of $950 million, and CDBG took a small cut of about $180 million. Then also what I haven't talked about yet, the McKinney-Vento homeless assistance grants. They proposed the same number of permanent supportive housing units to end chronic homelessness as they did last year, 25,500, I believe, to end chronic homelessness. Also some rapid rehousing within that. I think less than last year, about 8,000 units of rapid rehousing for homeless families. And then they sort of built on the Omnibus Appropriations Funding Bill from 2016 proposed about $38 million to help address youth homelessness, and the president's budget sort of built on that and proposed $25 million more to address youth homelessness. So some things in McKinney-Vento homeless assistance as well. Those are the big programs. Pretty much there aren't any other. Well, there are some other big things. There are some other changes here and there, but those are the major changes in the budget.
Okay, so any other questions for Ehren then? I'll put up for questions, and then I also want to ask you, Ehren, talk a little bit about process. So I heard a question here.
Yes. What about? Do you have any sense of what the funds for youth homelessness would be for?
Not off the top of my head. I can see see if I can find it in any of their fact sheets.
And you were saying 38 plus 25, so it's 63 million?
Well, it would be 25, as I understand it, would be 25 million new dollars in addition to the 38 million that was funded last year.
Oh, I see. Okay. But you don't know if it's for like permanent housing or?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay.
If I can find it quickly, I'll say it by the end of the call.
Thank you.
And what we can do for next month is invite someone from the National Alliance to End Homelessness and see if we can do a little more in-depth discussion. Since, obviously, it's always of interest, but also seems to be a focus of the President's budget. So,
I did have a question for Ehren. Ehren, with the $11 billion, is there going to be, are you all, or do you know, is there going to be, this push around the budget, is there going to be a separate campaign on that piece of it?
No, I think is the short answer. I think that the $11 billion really, well, not in the short run. Let's put it that way. I think it really sets us up to make a strong argument for, big rental assistance changes in the in the next administration, and gives us great messaging to try to push for the small increase this year. So I think right now we'll try to get this small 10,000 vouchers this year using the framing of, we need to end family homelessness, and this is a down payment on that. Mm-hmm. And then come the new administration, we can start looking at what a bigger proposal might look like. But any new administration and any new Congress would probably want to put their own stamp. They just wouldn't take the president's proposal whole hog anyway. So things would change between now and a new administration. So I think this is just the beginning of that conversation.
Is there any discussion about funding for housing funding for folks who are reentering communities from the correction facilities, either state, federal, or local?
Not in the HUD budget. There are some other things around criminal justice reform in the rest of the budget, as well as some things on increasing access to behavioral health services, which would help with that as well, but I'm not as familiar with those proposals. But I hear that there are some proposals around criminal justice reform and reentry in other parts of the budget, but not on housing specifically.
Thanks.
Ehren, so what happens next?
Well, actually, I just found what the 25 million, some language on what the 25 million for youth will do, so I can say that.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Pretty much, there's very little. They're saying it's innovative projects to allow local communities to test innovative, cost-effective, outcome-focused strategies for improving results. So I think this is something they will flesh out maybe in the coming weeks. Or maybe at the budget briefing that's at 1 o'clock today. Maybe they'll say more. But, so I found the language, but it doesn't give us much more to go on. That's pretty normal in president's budgets. They, start with general language and then they get more specific. So what happens next? The Congress will hold budget hearings where they'll invite the HUD secretary to explain and talk about the budget request. The Congress that also may or may not pass budget resolutions, which sort of set just top-line numbers. It seems like the House will, the Senate may or may not. That doesn't necessarily hold up the appropriations process, but it does set the top-line number. So after the appropriations budget hearings with the HUD secretary, at some point, Congress will take that top line number and turn that into allocations to the 12 subcommittees called the 302B, and then the subcommittees will start writing their bills. This will all move. Oh, and then we'll probably get markups, sometime in the spring. So this will all move pretty fast. I think, the allocations to the subcommittees, the hearings could start very soon this month, definitely. 302B allocations maybe as early as, early March, possibly markups as early as April. Maybe later, and the Senate usually moves slower, so that's more that the House is, but everyone's been saying the House is going to move really fast. So the timeline is extremely short. We're planning on getting our messages to the Hill in support of, most of what's in the president's budget, plus whatever tweaks we want to make or other things that they left out, whatever it is. We're trying to get our messages to the Hill really as soon as possible, because things are going to move so fast, and we don't want to be left hanging. So, I think we could see markups as early as April.
Okay, so spring, not spring, a late winter round of visits, I guess. I'm on speakerphone now. Do you know when they will be in the district? Do you have a schedule?
I don't have a recess schedule in front of me now. Sorry.
We'll figure that out. Not a problem. Okay. Speaker. Okay. Can you hear me? No. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Well, thank you. I will ask one more time. Any more questions for Ehren? Thank you, as usual, Ehren. We enjoyed having you on.
Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I forgot to say *7 to unmute. Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. Could you just say what 302B means?
Oh, sorry, yes. So this is really wonky, but actually super important for HUD programs. Every year, the House and Senate set a top-line number for how much money will be available for all discretionary programs. That number is already set because of the budget deal that happened at the end of last year that covered both 2016 and 2017. That, in budget speak, is called the 302A, but it's the total number for discretionary programs. The appropriations committees then split that number into 12 allocations for the 12 appropriations bills. The transportation HUD bill is one of those. Those 12 allocations then say how much is available for the HUD budget, and that's just called the 302B. 302A, top line, 302B, allocation for the specific bill. And why that's so important, it was especially stark at the end of last year when the overall non-defense discretionary, the discretionary side of the budget, because of the budget deal, increased by some 6-7%. And but the allocations were all over the board. Some bills increased by 12%, while funding for HUD programs only increased by less than 4%. So HUD didn't get a proportional share of the overall increase in discretionary programs, which means that many of the priorities that all of you and we were advocating for were not funded at the levels we had hoped. Home was restored, not to the levels it could have been. Vouchers that we had, like these targeted vouchers that many had been proposing, were not funded at all. The McKinney-Vento homeless assistance grants weren't, the chronic homeless supportive housing money wasn't put in. So many of these things could have been possible if the allocation to the HUD budget were larger, and it wasn't. So that is all to say that getting involved early before that 302B is set is really important, because advocating for money in the HUD budget before it's set can hopefully help your representatives and senators ask for a larger share overall, which really sets up down the line the chances of success or failure on any specific appropriations ask.
And so what I'm hearing, Erin, is that in the next few weeks, really, we need to be reaching out to our congressional delegation and ask them to talk to their colleagues on appropriations or in leadership about making sure that HUD's number, and it's actually THUD, and I want to ask you about that, the transportation HUD number, is high enough to accommodate increases in the HUD programs, and that's the second part of our advocacy, is to talk about the specific programs. So when they set the 302B it's really for transportation HUD, right?
Yes.
And how then is the division between transportation and HUD made?
That's made on the subcommittee level. So the transportation HUD subcommittee makes that determination. So yeah, it's hard to, there's always the possibility that within a given allocation, HUD gets more money or transportation gets more money, but it tends to, hover around a sort of similar division. So getting more money in the 302B overall likely means more money for HUD, unless there's some, huge hole in the transportation side for some reason, but that seems unlikely. So I think it's not unreasonable to think of, more money, at least some more money in the 302B will result in more money for HUD.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. And thank you very much, again, for joining the call. I do want to switch over to discussion of the state budget, and so we will certainly invite you back on, Erin. It's always good to have you. Thank you.
Sure thing.
And then, and now we will move. Actually, I think while we're on the federal, I'm just going to make a quick reference to a housing bill that is moving through Congress without a whole lot of discussion. But for quite a few years now, there have been, and again, people can mute their lines with a *7. *6 to mute, *7 to unmute. There have been attempts to modernize and reform certain aspects of public housing and the Housing Choice Voucher programs, things to make them easier to administer, easier to use, and hopefully spread the money a little bit farther. The current version is H.R. 3700, Housing Opportunities Through Modernization Act. It just passed the House unanimously. It's in the Senate, and we are working to get it through the Senate. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on that today. I do want to ask anybody who's interested, particularly working with public housing, housing choice voucher families, to pay attention to news, to H.R. 3700, to get in touch with us, and we'll have a little more information on the next call. If not, if anything is happening before then we'll certainly get out some information on that. But I did want to mention that is moving through. But really I want to focus, again, turn our attention back to budgets, and this time on the state level. We have Jeff Garis with the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center and the Better Choices Coalition, who's been doing yeoman's work on making sure that Pennsylvania's budget includes some adequate funding for human services and housing. And Jeff, I'm going to turn it over to you. Governor Wolf put out his proposal yesterday also.
Yes, great. Well, thank you. It's good to be here on the call. Thank you for this opportunity. This is going to be a very interesting year in terms of the Pennsylvania budget. So I think what I'll do is I'll start off kind of just giving a quick update kind of on where we are right now with the state budget and what some of the challenges are as we head into the next budget season. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about what's in Governor Wolf's budget proposal itself, a bit about where funding is being allocated and then how funding is being raised. And then I'm going to talk just a little bit then about the governor's budget address and maybe some of the challenges that there will be proceeding forward as this budget moves from a proposal to a finalized plan. And hopefully there will be a finalized plan at the end of it, which is kind of what brings us back here to talking about what our current situation is. We are in somewhat uncharted territory here in Pennsylvania because the 2015-16 budget, as I think all of you are aware, has really not been finally resolved. It dragged on through the impasse for several months last year, past the June 30th deadline. It appeared in November that they were getting close to a compromise budget between what the governor had proposed and what was coming from the legislature. That particular budget would have spent about $30.5 billion. It would have made some significant increases to education funding in various areas. It also made some investments in human services. And it did try to focus on eliminating the structural budget deficit, which has been growing over the last few years due to budgets that really did not add up, that were not really sound budgets. And it is something that has resulted in credit downgrades several times over the last few years. Pennsylvania is now viewed as a much riskier investment in terms of extension of credit by creditors. Standard & Poor's, many of the others have already downgraded it, which means that we are also now paying more each year in interest payments on the borrowing that we have done and that we continue to do to make up for the fact that we have these structural imbalances. Unfortunately, that compromise, which I don't think anyone was really excited about, but it was, I think, probably the best definition of what a compromise is, which is everybody gets a little bit of something and everybody feels like they also, lost out in a number of areas. Unfortunately, that kind of fell apart as we headed into the month of December and into the holidays. And the compromise agreement of the $30.5 billion spend number collapsed. What eventually was passed right before the new year by both the House and the Senate was a budget that really looked pretty much like what the House had passed back at the end of the June last year. And that was a much smaller spend number. It was $30.3 billion. That included significantly less funding for education. The governor did a partial veto, used his blue pen for some line items. Basically, they went ahead and funded a lot of the budget, because already, as you know, service providers were facing serious problems in terms of getting credit, in terms of going ahead without payment, providing the services. So they did the partial budget for this year. And there's some outstanding issues around higher education, pre-K, special ed, K-12 education, and some issues, too, around corrections funding that did not make it through the governor's veto. So, we are now at a point where the budget that was passed, that is partially vetoed, is what is in effect the understanding and the expectation, and the hope is that they resolve these differences, that they come back to something more similar to the compromise agreement that was in place before, that would make these investments in education and that would also not be out of balance because the independent fiscal office, as we got into this particular budget address leading up to it, a couple of days before that, the independent fiscal office looked at what is currently in place for the 2015-16 budget, and they noted that it does not add up, that we would actually end the year with a larger structural deficit. The estimate right now is about $500 million or more out of balance, which is part of the reason why there needs to be some effort to fix and resolve the outstanding issues from the 2015-16 budget. So that's where we are. We have a budget that is not complete for the fiscal year that we are now more than halfway through. It is also a budget that is fiscally out of balance. And in the context of that now, for the first time, and I said we're in uncharted territory, we've now had a governor who's had to do a budget address for the next fiscal year with significant issues still unresolved from the current fiscal year, which I think is a pretty significant challenge, and you can see why this would be a particularly challenging environment for proposing a 2016-17 budget. But that's what the governor did yesterday. The governor did announce his proposal for the 2016-17 budget. This budget would raise about $33.3 billion. That is larger than the current budget that we have for 15-16. It would actually not spend the entire 33.3. It would spend about 32.7 billion, in part because this budget is building in funding to pay off and eliminate the structural deficit that is following us into the 2016-17 budget year. So, this budget is larger than the previous year's budget, in part to close the structural deficit. There are also mandated spending increases. There are cost drivers that will automatically increase the budget from last year to this next year. And that total spend is driven by about $1.6 billion in mandated spending increases. What are these mandated spending increases that will automatically require this year's budget to be larger? The one simply is the debt obligations. These are the interest payments that we have to make. That's over $100 million that need to be made in debt payments. Additionally, there are mandated spending increases for corrections. These include costs related to salaries, benefits, staffing of the prisons, contractual obligations for corrections officers and corrections staff. That means that the corrections budget for 2016-17 needs to be automatically $178 million larger than this past year. Also, there are mandated spending increases for human services, which I know is of interest to a lot of folks here. In order to provide the services that we are obligated to provide, there needs to be an increase of about $800 million for funding for human services in the 2016-17 budget. And additionally, there are pension payments that need to be made. The governor's been pretty clear he does not want to delay or figure out ways to reduce these pension payments in terms of the obligations that have to be paid already. In part, that's what's created some of the challenges around the pensions now, is that there were decisions made, going back a decade and a half, to delay payments, to make some assumptions that the increases in the stock market and the increases in investment would allow us to not make those payments at that time. We could put those off. Well, now we're having to make those payments, and the governor's committed to making sure that we, continue to pay off those pension obligations. That's about another $500 million for the increased pension costs. That's $500 million. So as I mentioned, that is accounts for about $1.6 billion of the increase from last year's budget to this year's budget. There are some other areas where the governor has proposed to increase spending beyond that. The other areas would be providing an additional $500 million, $500 million for aid to school districts. This would include special education, K-12 education. This would also include some of the construction costs for schools. It also includes funding for higher education. So the governor is proposing that we increase funding for education for 2016-17 by $500 million. All of the other increases then from last year to this year, aside from the mandated costs and the increased funding for education, there's about $120 million more in this budget beyond what's required and what's going to be committed for education. Some of those priorities that the governor has outlined include some efforts to provide more funding for combating the heroin and opioid epidemic, issues related to protecting food supply and farmers. There are also some efforts to look for areas where we can make reductions in costs and areas where we can provide savings through efficiencies. A lot of the governor's budget includes areas where by streamlining processes, by being more efficient, more funding that's coming in can be allocated directly to the programs that people really particularly want to see funded, which of course include education and human services. Now, so the question then becomes if this next year's budget, 2016-17, is automatically going to be larger due to these mandated expenditures and increases, plus some of the others that the governor would like to make along the lines of education. How are we going to pay for this? Well, the governor is proposing a number of ways to raise the revenue. I'm just going to run through these in order of the ones that would be that would raise the largest amount of new revenue for 2016-17 down to the ones that are the smaller amounts. One thing that he has proposed for funding this year's budget would be a slight increase in the personal income tax. The current rate is 3.07%. The proposal is to raise that to 3.4%. That would raise an additional $1.4 billion. And that actually reflects the proposal that was agreed to by both parties last fall that is a smaller amount than what he had proposed last year. Last year he'd been proposing an increase to 3.7%. This represents the number in between that seemed to be the one that had support from all parties involved. One of the other areas where he would raise the revenue to make these additional investments this next year in 2016-17 would be through some tobacco taxes. The governor is proposing an increase of $1 per pack of cigarettes, an increase in the tax on cigarettes packs by $1. This would also include 40% tax on cigars, chewing tobacco, smokeless tobacco, and e-cigarettes. Those are currently not taxed. Pennsylvania is one of the only places where we don't have consistent tobacco tax that applies to cigars and smokeless tobacco. So this $1 per pack increase on the tax on cigarettes plus 40% on these other currently non-tax products would raise about $600 million over the next year. Another area where the governor proposes to raise the revenue needed to fund the budget and to close the structural deficit would be a slight expansion of the sales tax. This would be an expansion of the sales tax, the 6% sales tax in the state, to entertainment-related items, specifically to cable television would be subject to sales tax, movie theater tickets, as well as digital downloads. Applying the 6% sales tax to cable television, theater tickets, digital downloads would raise about $414 million. Also, and this is one that I think a lot of folks have been looking at for quite a few years, would be a tax on natural gas drilling in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania continues to be the only state that does not have a statewide severance tax on gas drilling in terms of major gas-producing states. There is the impact fee that goes to local communities, which is a much lower rate. What the governor is proposing would incorporate and cover the impact fee that goes to local communities that is making a difference in those communities, as well as the larger overall tax that would be going into the state fund. The tax rate that he's proposing on gas drilling is 6.5%, and again, that includes the lower impact fee already factored into that. Based on what the current rates are for natural gas, the estimate is that implementing this at the beginning of 2016-17 would raise about $217 million based on current gas prices. Now, some of you may remember gas prices were quite a bit higher a year or two ago. A tax like this at that point in time could have raised in the neighborhood, once it was phased in, of about $1 billion per year. The gas rates are much lower now. That's not likely to stay that way forever. So this would be a tax that would, down the road, as gas prices increase, would generate more revenue. Additionally, the other areas where the governor would raise revenue to fund the budget would be a 0.5% tax on insurance premiums for individuals and businesses. This would be for fire, property, and liability casualty insurance. That would raise just over $100 million. There would also be a tax of 8% on the casino slot machine winnings, table game winnings, 3.4% tax on Pennsylvania lottery winnings. This would raise, about $67 million. And finally, there would be an 11% increase on the banking industry tax. This is what we've called sometimes the bank shares tax. This would be able to raise close to $40 million for the 2016-17 budget. So that's a little bit. It's a diversified way of raising revenue. There's the personal income tax. There are some expansions and applications of tax to things like the entertainment, to tobacco products, to gambling winnings, and then there's the tax on the gas drillers would be one of the other significant parts of that. So that's how that budget would be funded for the 2016-17 fiscal year. So I guess before I wrap up, I kind of want to set the context sort of where we are now, and then I'll be glad to take questions. This begins by talking a little bit about the governor's budget address itself. I focused a bit on the numbers. In fact, you probably heard more specific numbers related to the governor's budget proposal from me right now over the last 15 minutes than people heard in the less than half-hour speech the governor gave yesterday. Because the governor began his speech by saying, this was not going to be a typical budget speech or an ordinary budget speech. And what he really focused on yesterday when he gave his budget address to the General Assembly was the fact that if we do not make investments, if we do not raise revenue to fund the budgets, we cannot afford to fund even the services that people count on right now. We have had several years now where we've attempted to put together budgets that, do not increase taxes anywhere. There have even been some, going back a few years that decreased or eliminated taxes. Capital stock and franchise tax has now been fully phased out. There are other corporate taxes that have also been decreased. And, this kind of budgeting where we try to make investments for our future, but do it in a way where we don't actually invest anything additional now, has been part of what's led us to the place where we have had these significant structural imbalances and this growing structural deficit. And the governor indicated that he's very committed to making sure that we have a budget that is fiscally sound, in part because we really cannot afford any more credit downgrades. We're now considered one of the least credit-worthy states in the country. We're paying quite a bit more. I believe the number is somewhere close to $150 million, $170 million just in interest payments that we have to pay on the higher rate right now for our borrowing. So the governor has indicated, that he is not going to enact a budget that is like what we've had over the last few years, which is a budget that does not adequately raise the money to fund the things that we want to have in this state. And so he really talked yesterday in pretty grim terms about, what would happen, that his preference would be that we raise the revenue that we need, that we do some sound budgeting, that we try to raise revenue in a fair way so that we can make these investments, so that we can keep up with our mandated spending increases, our mandated costs that are increasing each year. But he said that pretty clearly, if the legislature is not ready to step up, and that's really been where things have broken down, is it's been in the legislature where there's been the resistance to, raising taxes, raising revenue, that, if the legislature doesn't step up and come up with some ways, and they don't even have to be the ways that he proposed. He was fairly clear about that too. But if we don't figure out a way to raise more money to fund the budget that we need to have, then we will see cuts. And I just want to highlight those here quickly. If we continue with the budget that's partially in place for this year, if you projected it out over the 2015-16 year, the structural deficit increases by over $500 million. If we do the same kind of budget for 2016-17, if we don't raise additional revenue going forward, we will be about $2.2 billion behind on the structural deficit. And so in order to figure out a way to reduce the size of the budget to what the revenue would be raised if we didn't increase any taxes anywhere, didn't create any additional taxes, he talked about needing to cut $2 billion from the budget over the next year. He talked about a $1 billion cut to pre-K through 12th grade education, basic education and pre-K. We saw, what the impact was of significant reductions in funding to schools a few years ago. This would be similar to that in size, and we've not really even gotten back to where we were previously. There would be no funding for school construction. There would be no funding for state-related universities. It would also require, if we don't raise revenue to meet the budget that we already have, we would need to cut, according to the governor, about $600 million for human services areas that are not mandated. And we would also increase our debt costs, and that would also result in, for school funding at least, greater increases at the local level on property taxes for the local school districts to try to make up what would not be coming in from the state for those communities that would be able to do that. So, the governor spoke in pretty blunt terms about that. There's been a lot of reaction to it so far. I will say that a lot of legislators yesterday did not seem to be very pleased about the budget address, given that there's really not been much negotiating happening for the last month and a half to resolve the 2015-16 budget. It could be quite a while before we see any real negotiations beginning over what to do over the 2016-17 budget. So that's kind of where things stand right now. I think right now the central issue that is facing the state of Pennsylvania really comes down to are we willing to pay more in the form of taxes and fees in order to have the kind of investments that people have come to expect and come to rely on, and the kinds of services that people have come to expect, from schools, from higher education, and from human services. And so I think, the message that, legislators are going to be waiting to hear is, are people saying, hold the line, no tax increases, no additional revenue, or are they going to hear people saying, we need these services, we rely on these services, we really think we should all do our fair share, and we do think we need to increase our investment. I think that's really what it's going to come down to, is what are they hearing from their constituents. So I'll pause there. I know we're getting toward the end of the time, but I'll be glad to answer any questions. Again, we're starting to do some of our initial analysis. I have some information on specific line items, and if I don't, I'll try to get an answer for you.
And Jeff, this is Cindy. I'm just going to jump in before I open it to to questions for a couple of minutes and just let people know that homeless assistance, it looks like a very slight increase in the governor's proposal, 3.5% increase. Human Services Development Fund, not the block grant, but the basic fund line item, also about a 3.5% increase. Legal services, a 10% increase on their small budget. That's nice. I see in DCED, in Keystone Communities, which is what's left of any community revitalization investment, and includes the Elm Street and Main Street. I'm a little puzzled by this, Jeff. Maybe you can answer a question. I see it at $15 million, but I also see a column. I'm looking at a spreadsheet that was put up on Pennsylvania Legislative Services.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking at a column that says 2016-17, but next to it, 2015-16 available with supplementals. And I'm not sure what the supplementals were because it has Keystone Communities listed at $15 million, and as far as we knew, it was $6 million. So do you have any idea what supplementals they're referring to?
I believe there was some supplemental funding that the governor approved when he did the line item veto, but I can check and get a more specific answer for you on that, Cindy. And this is in the DCED program funding?
Yeah, in the DCED Keystone Communities. So, and to people on the call, we will get that information out to you. So we do have a minute or so. People hang on a little longer. We can continue talking, but if you have questions, you can star 7 to unmute. Go ahead.
Hi, Cindy. It's Joyce from the Housing Alliance. It's more a comment than a question, and I'm not directed at you, Jeff. I guess from as an advocate standpoint, and it's hard to get it. I guess I was concerned by the rhetoric again yesterday to have to step back into this. Many of our members are really struggling, mental health providers who are on the phone. I know Diana Ames is on from Erie doing great work for the people that she works with and for. I wish, we could get to a place where we're negotiating or trying to work in this. I understand and I agree there needs to be revenue. Again, it's not really a question. I just wanted to, here we are again, starting in a place where people are digging their heels in, and people, our members and people who are served by our members are suffering. And again, I wish we could get to a place where they could sit at the table and figure this stuff out.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I think everyone is kind of dreading, where will we be on June 30th? Are we going to look at another prolonged budget impasse? On the one hand, it's an election year. They would like to probably get out of the Capitol and be out campaigning. They typically tend to try to get the budgets through a little bit faster when there's an election coming up in the fall. But again, we're in uncharted territory, and this is incredibly stressful for the people who provide services and the people who receive services. And so again, I think there needs to be the message that, we need to also have an on-time budget, which is mandated by the Constitution.
On time and fair, equitable. So this is Cindy. I will add a thought there. I echo Joyce's concern about the rhetoric and how highly partisan the budget talk. I'm not talks in terms of negotiations, but talking around the budget is so highly partisan, and that made it difficult, or makes it difficult, for many agencies to get involved. I would encourage folks, though, to have internal discussions in your organizations about what you can do. What we at the Housing Alliance have done, our position is we are not supporting a Wolf budget or a Republican budget. We are supporting line items and we are supporting revenue. And I would encourage all of you, I know many of you advocate for your programs I would encourage you to have discussions with your board and your staff about whether you can come out in support of revenue, at least generally, because what you will hear from the legislators is, my constituents don't want us to raise taxes. And sometimes I walk into an office and I say, raise my taxes, please. And they say, you're the only person who ever says that. I'm sure that's not true because I know Jeff and the Better Budget Coalition have been out there. But I think they need some cover, especially in a political year. They need to know that Pennsylvanians understand that you can't have services without revenue. And we need to look for fair ways of raising that revenue. So even if you're not supporting any particular tax, having that conversation, I think is really important, and I think that we can do it in a nonpartisan way. It may turn out that the private sector nonprofit community actually needs to take a leadership role in bringing some common sense to the table here, and let's see if we can just focus on line items, focus on our programs. Actually, let me take that back. It's not the line items we want. It's services to our clients. It's bringing with you some of the people that you serve and that you work with to tell their stories and to emphasize the need to pay for the services that is so essential that the Commonwealth provides. So I'll get off my soapbox. We are a little past 12:30, but does anybody have questions for Jeff? It's *7 to unmute. All right. This is certainly a continuing saga, and thank you so much, Jeff. We will continue the discussion, and I'm sure you'll be hearing from the Housing Alliance in terms of some advocacy and on the federal level, and keeping you abreast on what's happening on the state level also. So thank you all very much.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.